Integrity House started in the mid-60s as a parole officer in 1965. I began looking and understanding the problem of addiction. It really all started in November of '65 when I met a gentleman by the name of Lloyd Wright, musician. He was a Golden Gloves champion and an artist and a heroin addict. And Lloyd started educating me to the issues of addiction and the problems, but mainly what I was concerned about was, here's this beautiful man that had all this talent, and yet he's throwing it all away in a heroin habit. Lloyd led to other individuals, and pretty soon the State Parole Department had me working on a caseload of narcotic addicts. And at that time, there was no treatment really for a drug addict. Narcotic addicts were behavioral disorders, character disorders, and they all had to carry a card. And if they were found by the police without their card, they would be locked up. The only treatment was AA at the time. And so a lot of the parole officers and my supervisors felt this was not the best scenario to help people. And so we began with a caseload, and I began to get to know the addicts. I'm a living example of someone who knew nothing about addiction and someone who learned everything about addiction from addicts themselves. So in 1968, when I went on for my master's, I actually lived with my cousin Rich and myself and several of my parolees at 45 Lincoln Park. That was really the trial by fire that I needed to get to know how to help people who were addicts. And in 6 months of getting ripped off, mugged, and just being pretty much useless as far as helping, I learned that really I could not help these people unless they helped themselves. And really, before they could help themselves, they had to actually help me. So the concept of self-help and mutual help started with me learning how to help them and them learning how to help themselves. And basically we joined together as a force, as one family, rather than me as the learned physician or social worker and they as the client or patient. We joined hands as a family, as a healing unit, and that was much more powerful than the traditional helping relationship, doctor-patient relationship. So in 1968, August, Integrity was incorporated, and officially we began as a program, although we didn't consider ourselves a program because most of my quote-unquote clients were actually using drugs while I was trying to help them. Nonetheless, I got a call from Don Loria at UMDNJ. Don told me, he says, do you want to be part of a staffing grant with your work at Integrity? I said, well, really, I'm not doing too well. He said, nonetheless, that you're the only shop on the block that's actually doing something for drug addicts, and I'd like to have you part of our team. So we finally got the funding from National Institute of Health. We also got some help from Howard Quirk from the Victoria Foundation, and basically after a year of living with drug addicts and learning on my own, experiential learning, helping each other, Integrity was funded 1 year later. At that time, we still really didn't have, there were no training sessions to go to, there were no licensed facilities, there was no professional counselors, there was no certified counselors, there was no accredited facilities at the time, and therefore we started out kind of at the frontier. And we came into Newark at a time right at the riots, right after the riots. And we pretty much had to build our community and our program at that time. You could say the rest is history. Integrity has starting from living in with several parolees who are addicts. We now have 360 student members at any given time. Instead of calling them clients or residents, we feel naming is very important. If you name someone something, pretty soon they will learn to be that name. A patient, calling a person a patient, very dependent type of person. A client is someone who receives help. But a student member is someone who gives help, who receives help, who needs to learn, and who is a member of a family, in the larger family called the therapeutic community. So I just want to explain what the therapeutic community is. And the best way to explain it, it's the community of people, including the physical plant, the community itself, the staff, the people, the student members, the plant. That is the healing agent. That is what really takes over to save lives and to help people. Not the staff member, and not even the student member, him or herself. It's the gestalt, or the big picture. And that is a concept that's hard to understand. The therapeutic community, which I authored the first definition in 1981 from the Therapeutic Communities of America, therapeutic community basic principles really have nothing to do with shouting and screaming at each other, even encounters and stuff like that. That is not the therapeutic community. Those are tools that we use. What the therapeutic community really is a healing, is a community that becomes a healing agent by the way it's defined and the way it's joined together. So the real therapeutic community has a bunch of people who respect each other, who live together as family members, who share each other's griefs and temptations and trials and tribulations, who help each other, who help themselves, who take on responsibility, who learn by experience as well as didactically. People who are convinced they should act happy even if they don't feel happy. All this being said, we need professional counselors, we need nurses and doctors, we need psychiatrists and so on. But the bottom line, if a person comes into a therapeutic community with all these issues, at the same time, that person come in from the drug court or the criminal justice system, and quite frankly now most of our clients are from the criminal justice system, they have a bottom line. They either do it at integrity or they go to jail. So what happens is, because the student members that we get are very highly manipulative, very skilled in manipulating, we have learned, and most of our staff are actually recovering people, we have learned how to work that manipulation, to allow it to a certain degree, to promote the integrity and the concept of individuality, but at the same time, that individual has to learn how to be part of a team and has to learn how the therapeutic community itself has to be embraced and understood before he can move into what I need and what I want and my training and my family and my relationships and my legal issues and so on. So to understand the therapeutic community, it's kind of like a dialectic between belonging and individuality. When you come into a therapeutic community, you have to understand, what is the history of this program? How do I belong? How do I become a member here? Not in a cult sense, but a member in a therapeutic community is one who doesn't commit violence, someone who is loving and caring, and if they aren't, they should act that way. Someone is willing to help themselves and each other, and so on. Those are kind of the knowledge points that someone has to learn when they come in the therapeutic community. But after a while, and they learn all that, and they act it, and they believe it, then they have to learn and ask the question, well, who am I? How do I fit into this kind of community of loving people? What's my fingerprint? So they look back, well, I need to get a high school degree. I need to get training in the area that I want to get trained in. I need to get my license back. I need to work on my spirituality, my family, my relationships. So in other words, these are individual things that a student member needs to learn and understand when he or she comes into therapeutic community. Integrity sees 1,500 people a year. Most of them are men, say maybe 75% are men. The rest are women. We have youth 18 and under, all boys. But they all have to learn basically how to be a person. And sometimes you might want to say, well, the therapeutic community is almost like a mother nurturing a child, bringing a child up. Not so much by what the mother says, but by what the mother does. And so the mother and father are the therapeutic community role models. And in a well-working therapeutic community, you have to understand there are role modeling going on, and people learn much more. People learn much more by what they see another person do than what they hear another person say. Well, I mean, this is pretty standard when you're growing up, right? As a child, you look at your parent, the parent says, don't do this, do that. Then you watch the parent do just what he's telling you not to do. So then that's how you learn. You learn what he does, what she does, that's what you do. Unfortunately, a lot of our people in integrity had no parents, so no models to, and a lot of them have the streets, the models of the street, which doesn't teach the kind of thing that will enhance individuality and bring a person into recovery. So I've said a lot about the community. The individuality part of the therapeutic community is very important. If we can't prepare a person to be themselves and be their own person and enhance that kind of development, we've done a disservice, because really what we've done is kind of what they do in the prison. You put someone in prison, they learn how to be a prisoner, but when they get out, they don't have a prison anymore, so they don't know how to be a real person in the outside world. And the same thing in a therapeutic community. If you have a person in the TC and you don't train them how to get out, what you've done is you've created a cult, and that person, when they leave, they're helpless. One of the biggest problems of prisons is that they breed helplessness, because they teach nothing in terms of you get up at a certain time, you go to eat, you go out in the yard, you work out, you do your job function, you go to lunch, then you go to afternoon session, whatever you do, evening, you go to visits, and basically everything's told and given to you. You don't have to pay your bills. You don't have to reconcile your relationships. You don't have to understand and plan for the future. You don't have to pay for your child's support. You don't have to pay for your child's college. So basically, you don't have any responsibilities in prison at all. When you get out, you have all responsibilities. It's no wonder why we have a relapse rate out of prison in 3 years. 70% of prisoners getting out who are drug addicts relapse. 50% will actually recidivate, go back to prison. Those kind of statistics for $46,000 a year, that's not what we call the bang for the buck. If you're going to pay $46,000 for a prison cell for 1 year, and all you're going to get is 70% of them getting arrested in 3 years, maybe there's a better way, and there is. One of the better ways is the drug court, the criminal justice system, working in conjunction with therapeutic communities like Integrity, work together, love, concern, self-help, responsibility, but guess where the foot is? Right up the backside if they don't comply with their legal obligations. If they've used drugs, and if they hurt someone, or if they become an addict and they steal, they burglar, whatever, they will wind up having to face the music of the law. And the beauty of the drug court success rate, by the way, is the opposite. Drug court has 70% success rate over 3 years. 70% versus the traditional status quo system right now, which is 30%. I'll buy into those odds. And a lot of people come into Integrity have a court stipulation, drug court, or probation, or some type of judicial stipulation. It's a good thing. I mean, just like your child. A lot of times you tell your child, bring up your child, you got to do this. And he said, I don't want to do that. Well, you got to do it anyway. Why? Because I said so. End of sentence. Until the child gets 12 or 13, then you got to work with that child. But we have children here, in a sense, that need to be told, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. We work with them, interact with them, but bottom line, most of them, if they are court referred, have to comply or face the music with the courts, face the legal consequences. In the final analysis, when does recovery finish? When does treatment finish? Integrity is one of the few programs, I think, nationally that believes in a 5-year window, 5-year continuum of treatment recovery. The initial treatment, we have 6 months of therapeutic community, live-in. We have followed by 6 months of a halfway house, live-in workout, followed by 1 year of outpatient where they get counseled once or twice a week, followed by another 3 to 4 years of case management. And that's the critical time, because people can go through a program, can act as if, but when it comes down to it, it's a matter of will they be able to survive without relapsing. And one of the problems is that when people are out there without any kind of probation or drug court or stipulations or whatever, and if you just kind of say you're discharged and we're not going to bother with you, they have a tendency to relapse because they're going to try things on their own and they're not going to succeed. This is a critical situation because right now addiction nationally is seen as an acute disorder or an acute psychobiosocial disorder. Okay, you have to understand that our society, our country really, believes that addiction is an acute illness. But that means it's treated as an acute illness, which means that treatment is applied for 7 days, 28 days, and there's oftentimes little follow-up. In other words, if you go and break your arm, you go to the hospital, it gets set, it gets treated, and then you get released, and maybe you come back and the bandages are taken off, and you're cured. That's the model that our country has put on addiction. The experts at SAMHSA and National Institute of Health and so on have prescribed the right model, which is a long-term model treating a chronic illness, a chronic disease. Drug addiction is spelled out by all the research nationally as a chronic disease, and yet we are treating it funding-wise as an acute disease.